So today's video is going to focus on the nervous system, some basic types of cells, its functions, and some divisions within it. Okay, we're going to start with functions of the nervous system. So some basic functions of the nervous system are its ability to gather sensory input. And when we gather sensory input, that's basically what we're doing is we're gathering information. Right? We're receiving information about the surrounding environment, the temperature, pain, touch, vibration, visual, hearing, right? But we're gathering all that information. Another function of the nervous system is to then integrate that information. So it'll take that information and it will process that information. It will process and interpret that sensory information. So this is when your brain is making decisions, when your spinal cord is responding to a reflex, right? But it's processing and interpreting that sensory information and deciding if anything needs to be done with it. From there, the final function of our nervous system is the motor output. This is going to be the actual response to the stimuli, to whatever information was put in. And this is going to occur through the nervous system talking to the muscles and the glands. Right? But these are three basic functions of the nervous system: to gather information, to make a decision about it, and then to elicit a response regarding that information. Okay, so let's look at how the nervous system is classified. The nervous system is broken into two main divisions: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So in the central nervous system, okay, I've got so that's my CNS, which is again abbreviated which means central nervous system. The PNS is the peripheral nervous system. Okay, so these are our two basic nervous system divisions: central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. And the central nervous system is pretty straightforward. All that's in that central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord. So those are our two parts that are involved in the central nervous system, and that's it. Our peripheral nervous system is broken up a lot more. So our peripheral nervous system is first divided into afferent versus efferent portions. Okay? And so our afferent portions, these are sensory neurons. So these are bringing information in. So the afferent, or the sensory portions, these are bringing information in, where the efferent is bringing information away from the central nervous system. So these are motor neurons, again, bringing information away from the central nervous system. So afferent takes it towards, efferent takes it away from the central nervous system. The efferent is then broken into somatic versus autonomic. Okay, and the somatic nervous system, this is voluntary. This is what we can control. So this is sending messages to my skeletal muscles, that kind of thing. That's my somatic, or my voluntary portion of my nervous system. Okay, my autonomic is, like it says, it's automatic, and I don't have control over it. Okay, and my autonomic system is going to be further broken down into parasympathetics, which is also known as our rest and digest. And we're going to look more in depth at these later, kind of near the end. So we have our parasympathetic, which is our rest and digest. And as some of you are probably more familiar with, our sympathetic, right? That's our adrenaline. That's our fight or flight system. Right? When we're embarrassed or we're scared, that's what's kicking into gear. So these are the divisions of our nervous system. Again, central versus peripheral. Central just contains our brain and spinal cord and nothing else. Peripheral contains those afferent and efferent nerves, the sensory and motor nerves. Efferent being broken into automatic, somatic, and then autonomics being broken into parasympathetics and sympathetics. Okay, so now we're going to start looking at what we call neuroglia. Okay, and that's how I'm going to spell neuroglia. So neuroglia, these are supporting cells of the nervous system. These are not neurons. meaning these do not conduct messages for us. Right? They protect the nervous system. They support those nerves, but they're not conducting messages. Again, these are strictly support type cells. And we're going to start with looking at neuroglia in the central nervous system. So the first one we're looking at here is this astrocyte. Okay, astrocyte. Hopefully we know we've heard or seen astro before, right? Astro means star, right? Because it's a cell that looks kind of like a star. Okay, so that's where the astrocyte comes from. This is again a cell that is found in the central nervous system. Right? It forms what we call the blood-brain barrier, which is also abbreviated BBB. So the blood-brain barrier basically forms between the capillaries and the neurons. And the blood-brain barrier acts as an extra filter between the capillaries and the neurons. Its job is to control the chemical environment of the brain. Okay. So we don't want, everything we put in our body isn't necessarily great for our body. So we don't want everything to get into our nervous system. We want to be extra careful what's getting into our brain and getting into our nerves, because as most of you know, those cells don't heal very well. They don't regenerate well. So we want to protect them. So these astrocytes, as you can see in these images, see how they're wrapping around these blood vessels? Okay, it's starting to wrap around the blood vessel there. So it acts as an extra filtering layer. So it helps control the chemical environment of the brain. It doesn't keep everything out, but it can help keep out certain toxins, certain poisons. Smaller molecules can still get by. For instance, alcohol can cross the blood-brain barrier. That's why it affects how people sometimes behave and how they act. These are the most abundant neuroglia cells that we have. So we have the most of these astrocytes because we are trying to protect the brain. And again, these are in the central nervous system. So our next supporting cell, again, this is another form of neuroglia in the central nervous system, is this microglia. So it's another form of neuroglia supporting cell in the central nervous system. Okay? And this microglia or microglial would be one cell. Okay? These are, you'll notice it acts like a little phagocyte. Okay? So these are a type of phagocyte. If you remember, a phagocyte is a cell that eats things. Okay? And so these are going to help clean up our brain. They're going to help dispose of dead cells and bacteria that may have gotten into our central nervous system. So we have two more in the central nervous system. Okay, our next neuroglia in the central nervous system are these ependymal cells. Okay, here's your spelling right here. These ependymal cells, if you'll notice, they have cilia on them. And so the importance of them having cilia on them is that they impact what we call our cerebral spinal fluid. So you're going to find these cells lining the cavities of the brain and the spinal cord. So the brain is not completely solid and the spinal cord is not completely solid. It has some hollow parts in it. And those cavities are going to be made of fluid. And that fluid is the cerebral spinal fluid. And so the ependymal cells, their job is to make, monitor, and help move the cerebrospinal fluid around. And cerebral spinal fluid is abbreviated CSF. That's what you'll see most often from now on. So they are helping secrete. So you can see these cells are larger. They're helping secrete or make that cerebral spinal fluid. They're monitoring its composition. What is it made of? What does it contain? Is there enough of it? And they're helping move that cerebral spinal fluid around the CNS so that it continually circulates and bathes all the cells. Our last one in the central nervous system is this oligodendrocyte. So again, we're still a supporting cell in the central nervous system, and it's this oligodendrocyte. So there's your spelling right there. The oligodendrocyte is going to help myelinate nerves in the central nervous system. So myelin is this lipid layer that surrounds the nerves and will help insulate them. And the end result in having myelin is that messages travel faster on a myelinated nerve than they do on an unmyelinated nerve. And we're going to look at how that works in the future. But right now, what all I really need you to get is that this oligodendrocyte, it's going to help myelinate the nerves in the central nervous system. So it's going to create this myelin sheath that is this lipid layer that will surround the nerve and insulate it. And again, that's going to help the message travel faster. We're also going to have myelinated nerves in the peripheral nervous system that are formed by a different cell. And if we look at the difference here real quick, I want you to see how that one oligodendrocyte is myelinating multiple nerves and multiple areas of the nerve. So in the peripheral nervous system, this will look a little bit different, but you'll see how it's a process of the oligodendrocyte that reaches out and wraps around it. So now we're going to shift our focus to the peripheral nervous system. So we're still talking about neuroglia. This time, though, we're now shifting to the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system, and we have two of them that we would like to talk about here in the peripheral nervous system. The first one is what we call a satellite cell. And a satellite cells are really just support cells. They offer support, and they can offer physical support. They also help cushion the nerve cell. They can help provide it with nourishment. But that's what these satellite cells are doing. You can see them surrounding this neuron cell body, helping protect it, support it, cushion it. Because again, remember, we are now in the peripheral nervous system. We don't have the spinal column. We don't have the skull surrounding everything and protecting everything. So the final neuroglia cell that we would like to talk about is the Schwann cell. And again, we're still in the peripheral nervous system. And this is what's called a Schwann cell. A Schwann cell is also going to do what the oligodendrocyte did. It's going to myelinate the nerves. The myelin is going to be the same. It's going to be that lipid layer that helps insulate the neuron. It helps speed up the messages. The only difference here is a little bit of how it does it. So if you'll notice here, the Schwann cell wraps its entire cell around the neuron. So but we'll wrap the entire cell around the neuron, not one process around the neuron. And it will form this extra layer called the neurolemma on the outside edge. And we'll talk about that. I will show you this, like a kind of a demo that'll help this make sense a little bit more in class. So it will form this neurolemma on the outside of the Schwann cell. And you can see that in the diagrams here. Okay, as the Schwann cell wraps around, see how nice and tight it's wrapping that myelin? But it's a cell, so it's going to have things in it, a nucleus, mitochondria, cytoplasm, all these things that are going to start to get pushed to the outside as the cell is tightly wrapping around it. Okay, and so the outermost layer of that is going to be what's called our neurolemma. And that's something different than what we see in the central nervous system. Okay, so that's all we're covering on this video today. So nice and short and sweet and just some nervous system basics.